when that movie came out. Was anything cut from that film?
The studio actually legally couldn't trim it. They couldn't cut anything.
50 years is a long time to keep a secret. Long enough for a film to become a classic, get studied in film schools, get quoted at dinner parties, and still somehow hide a mistake in plain sight. Mel Brooks has told interviewers for decades that Warner Brothers couldn't touch a single frame of his 1974 comedy without his say-so. Final Cut was his contractually and completely, and yet sitting inside that untouchable Final Cut is a moment that slipped past every editor, every censor, and every audience member for years. Today we're going to find it. We're going to talk about the fart jokes that almost got the film shelved, the casting decisions that could have changed the entire tone of the movie, and the strange, unscripted accident that ended up immortalized on 35mm film forever. By the end, you'll understand why Blazing Saddles isn't just a comedy. It's a small miracle that it exists at all. To understand why a movie this chaotic could even get made, you have to remember what 1974 looked like. America had just crawled out of Vietnam. Watergate was unraveling the presidency in real time. The civil rights movement had won major legal battles, but the culture hadn't caught up. Hollywood westerns in particular were still stuck in a fantasy where white heroes rode in to save the day and everyone else was scenery. Mel Brooks didn't want to gently poke fun at that formula. He wanted to take a sledgehammer to it. The setup is almost absurdly simple. A corrupt land baron wants to empty out the town of Rockridge so he can run a railroad through it. So he convinces a dim-witted governor to appoint a black sheriff, assuming the racist townsfolk will panic and abandon their homes. Instead, the new sheriff, Bart, turns out to be smarter, funnier, and more composed than every person trying to run him out of town. What starts as a cruel prank becomes a takedown of the very people pulling the strings. Brooks didn't write it alone. He brought in Richard Pryor, arguably the sharpest and most fearless comedic voice of the era, to help build the script. Pryor's fingerprints are all over Bart's dry, self-aware humor. He's a character who knows exactly how ridiculous the situation is and uses that awareness as a weapon. Pryor was actually the studio's first choice to play Bart on screen. That never happened. And the reason why changed the entire shape of the film, which we'll get into shortly. What's easy to forget now is how radical the ending is. Rather than wrap things up inside the fictional Old West, the final act literally busts through the walls of the Warner Brothers lot. The fight spills onto other sound stages, crashes into a musical number being filmed next door, and eventually pours out onto a real studio street. It's one of the earliest and boldest fourth-wall-breaking endings in mainstream American comedy, decades before it became a familiar trick in films and TV. And it's inside that glorious, deliberately messy finale that our blooper is hiding. Every making of retrospective about Blazing Saddles loves to talk about the campfire scene, and we'll get there, but the mistake we're chasing isn't a sound effect or a script joke. It's a continuity slip, the kind that happens when a production is moving too fast and too loose to double-check itself. Watch the climactic brawl closely as it spills out of Rockridge and onto the studio backlit. The chaos is the whole point. Pie fights, punches, actors crashing through walls dressed as cowboys 1 second and dancers the next. It's meant to feel unplanned, and by most accounts, a lot of it genuinely was. Brooks built his directing style around loosening the reins. He wanted actors improvising, breaking character, playing with timing in ways a tightly scripted film never could. That looseness is exactly how a background extra ends up wandering directly into a wide shot, wearing clothes that don't belong to any era in the film. A modern sweater, ordinary street shoes. Clearly a real bystander who wasn't part of the scene at all, caught on camera as the mob spills out past the studio gates. Rather than reshoot or cut around him, Brooks reportedly looked at the footage and decided it was funnier left in. Given how thoroughly the ending is already built on the idea of the movie collapsing into real life, a genuine stranger blundering into frame isn't just an accident anymore. It's almost a perfect punchline. Most viewers never register it, because the scene is deliberately overstuffed with sight gags competing for your attention. But once you know to look for the person who clearly isn't in on the joke, you can't unsee him. That instinct, leave the mistake in if it's funnier than the plan, tells you almost everything about how this movie was made. Not every risk Brooks took survived contact with the studio. Blazing Saddles is remembered as a film that got away with almost everything, but almost is doing some work in that sentence. Brooks has said in interviews over the years that several scenes involving the film's abduction subplot between the sultry lounge singer Lily Von Stupp and Sheriff Bart were written and shot to be far more explicit than what audiences ultimately saw. The finished film gives us a flirtatious, mostly implied bedroom scene. What existed in earlier drafts and on-set improvisation reportedly pushed much further into innuendo built around racial stereotypes about black men. Jokes that Brooks apparently worried would tip the film out of satire and into something crueler and less controllable. By his own admission, Brooks agonized over where that line sat. In some interviews, he said he regrets pulling back, worried he let nervousness override the bit. In others, he's defended the cut as the right call, arguing that a joke landing wrong could undercut the entire point the film was making about racism in the first place. That tension, a director simultaneously proud of how far he pushed and unsure if he pushed far enough, is part of what makes Blazing Saddles more interesting than a simple shock comedy. It wasn't chaos for its own sake. It was a calculated argument about what movies were allowed to say out loud, and Brooks kept recalibrating that argument scene by scene, sometimes cutting things not because they weren't funny, but because he wasn't sure the joke would land the way he intended. If there's one scene that defines a film's reputation, it's the campfire sequence. Cowboys eating beans around a fire, and the sound design making sure you know exactly what happens next. It was the first time a major studio film had ever included an audible flatulence gag, and Brooks didn't just allow it, he leaned into it, reportedly adding more sound effects in post-production after test audiences laughed so hard they drowned out the following lines of dialogue. Executives at Warner Brothers hated it. They saw a vulgar gag that risked embarrassing the studio. Brooks saw something else entirely, a direct assault on decades of Western mythology that had painted cowboys as clean, stoic, larger-than-life heroes. Making them loud, gassy, and human wasn't just a gross-out joke. It was the same demolition project the whole film was engaged in, just aimed at a different sacred cow. That same demolition instinct shows up in one of the film's strangest and most pointed scenes, a flashback to Bart's childhood, where his family's wagon is surrounded by warriors on horseback. It looks like it's about to turn into exactly the kind of scene countless Westerns had filmed before, until the tribal chief, played by Brooks himself, opens his mouth and starts speaking fluent Yiddish. It's absurd. It's also a direct jab at how thoroughly Hollywood had reduced native characters to a foreign, faceless threat, rarely given language, culture, or humanity of their own. By handing them a language associated with an entirely different persecuted group, Brooks forces the audience to notice how empty and interchangeable those old portrayals really were. Even the opening theme song plays the same trick. Frankie Lane, a veteran of sincere, dramatic Western ballads, was reportedly never told the film was a comedy. He recorded the title song completely straight, pouring real emotional weight into lyrics that are, on close listen, ridiculous. The result is a joke that works because one half of it doesn't know it's a joke at all. Almost none of the film's most memorable performances were the original plan. Richard Pryor was supposed to star as Bart, but Warner Brothers wouldn't insure him due to his legal troubles at the time, and the role went instead to Cleveland Little, a Broadway actor with almost no film experience. Little's cool, understated delivery ended up giving Bart a completely different energy than Pryor likely would have. More controlled, more ironic, and arguably better suited to landing the satire without tipping into something angrier than the film wanted. The Waco Kid very nearly wasn't played by Gene Wilder at all. Gig Young was cast first, and by most accounts collapsed on his first day of filming due to complications related to alcohol withdrawal, which was uncomfortably close to the very character he was supposed to be playing. Brooks scrambled, called Wilder, and had him on set within a day. Wilder's laid-back, half-checked-out charm became one of the most beloved elements of the entire film, and it happened almost by accident. Even the film's villain, Hedley Lamar, carries a small piece of Hollywood chaos with him. The running gag of every character mispronouncing his name as Hetty was apparently close enough to actress Hedy Lamar's real name that she reportedly threatened legal action, which Brooks settled quietly rather than fight in court. And the film's most physically imposing performer, Mongo, the man who famously punches out a horse, wasn't a trained actor at all. He was a former NFL defensive lineman, cast because Brooks needed someone who looked genuinely dangerous but could also sell a joke with a straight face. None of these were the safe, planned choices. Every one of them was a compromise, an emergency, or a gamble that happened to pay off. Warner Brothers wanted to bury this film quietly in a handful of theaters and hope nobody noticed. Instead, it became one of the highest-grossing comedies of its decade, and it did that by refusing to be careful. A studio that hated to be seen, a star who couldn't get insured, a replacement actor pulled in with a single phone call, a stranger who wandered into a shot and stayed in the movie forever. None of it was supposed to happen this way, and yet somehow that's exactly why it still works, 50 years later. Sometimes the most unforgettable